At 62, cleaning the floors where she once had an office, Margaret thought her life was over. Then a stranger saw her, really saw her, and that one moment of being truly seen changed absolutely everything. Margaret Walsh's knees ached as she knelt on the marble floor of the executive suite, scrubbing at a coffee stain that some careless person had left to dry overnight. The building was silent at 6 in the morning, just the way she preferred it. No one to see her, no one to pity her, no one to remember that 3 years ago she'd walked these same halls wearing a tailored suit instead of a janitor's uniform. She sat back on her heels, pressing one hand to the small of her back. 62 years old, and her body reminded her of that fact with every movement. The arthritis in her fingers made it harder to grip the cleaning supplies. The varicose veins in her legs throbbed after hours of standing. But she couldn't complain. She needed this job. The divorce had taken the house. Her daughter Rachel's silence had taken her heart. And pride, well, pride was something Margaret had learned to swallow a long time ago. "Just finish this floor and you can go home," she whispered to herself, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "One section at a time. That's all you can do." She was so focused on the stubborn stain that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her work area. "Excuse me, ma'am?" Margaret's head snapped up, her heart jumping in surprise. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive-looking navy suit. But it was his face that caught her attention. Kind eyes. A slight smile that seemed genuine rather than condescending. He looked to be in his late 30s, with dark hair showing just a touch of grey at the temples. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize anyone else was here." Margaret struggled to her feet, her knees protesting loudly. She steadied herself against the wall, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I'll get out of your way." "No, please. Don't rush on my account." He took a step closer, and Margaret noticed he was carrying a briefcase and a set of car keys. "I'm actually looking for someone. Mrs. Patterson, the head of housekeeping? I was supposed to meet her about some scheduling changes." Margaret blinked. Mrs. Patterson didn't usually deal with drivers directly, but maybe this was different. He must be one of the executive drivers given the quality of his suit. "She won't be in until 7, Margaret said, glancing at the industrial clock on the wall. "Another 45 minutes or so." The man nodded, then looked at her more carefully. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of concern. "Are you all right? You seem to be in pain." The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid her. Margaret blinked rapidly, forcing back the unexpected sting of tears. When was the last time someone had asked if she was all right? "Just old age catching up with me," she said, attempting a light tone that didn't quite land. "The floors don't clean themselves, unfortunately." "They certainly don't." He gestured toward the elevator. "I have some time before Mrs. Patterson arrives. Would you mind if I waited? Maybe we could talk for a moment. I promise I'm not as intimidating as I might look in this suit." Margaret hesitated. She should get back to work. She had 3 more floors to cover before her shift ended. But something about his demeanor, the way he stood there without the usual impatience she saw in executives and their staff, made her pause. "I suppose a few minutes won't hurt," she heard herself say, "though I can't imagine what a driver would want to talk to an old cleaning lady about." A strange expression crossed his face, something between amusement and sadness. "You'd be surprised." They moved to a small seating area near the windows. Margaret perched on the edge of a leather chair that probably cost more than she made in a month, acutely aware of her worn uniform and the cleaning supplies smell that probably clung to her. The man settled into the chair across from her, with an ease that suggested he was comfortable anywhere. He set his briefcase down and leaned forward slightly, his posture open and attentive. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. Margaret shook it, noting the firm but gentle grip. "Margaret Walsh, though most people just call me Meg." "Margaret," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It's a strong name. Classic." "It's old-fashioned, you mean?" She tried to smile, but it felt wobbly on her face. "Old-fashioned and strong aren't mutually exclusive." His eyes held hers, and Margaret felt something shift in her chest. When was the last time someone had really looked at her, really seen her? "You're very kind to say so, James, but I suspect you didn't stop to chat with the cleaning lady just to compliment her name." Actually, I stopped because you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, he said quietly. And because I've learned that the people who work when everyone else is sleeping often have the most interesting stories. Margaret's throat tightened. She folded her hands in her lap, studying her chapped, work-worn fingers. I don't think my story is particularly interesting. Just unfortunate. Unfortunate how? She shouldn't tell him. She didn't know this man. But something about the early morning quiet, the way he sat there without judgment, without hurry, loosened the words she'd kept locked inside for so long. 3 years ago, I worked here, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Not cleaning. I was an administrative coordinator on the 20th floor. Had my own office, my own desk with a nameplate. I was good at my job, or at least I thought I was. What happened? The company restructured. They eliminated my position along with a dozen others. I was 59, which might as well be ancient in the corporate world. No one wants to hire a woman my age, not for anything beyond entry-level positions. She paused, swallowing hard. My husband left me 6 months later. Said he couldn't handle the financial stress, but I think he'd just been waiting for an excuse. 34 years of marriage, gone in a lawyer's office. James's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the arms of his chair. I'm sorry. The divorce settlement gave him the house. I got half the debt and a used car that barely runs. Margaret tried to laugh, but it came out as more of a choke. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment across town, and when the savings ran out after a year of unsuccessful job hunting, I came back here. Full circle, I suppose. Except now, I'm invisible. You're not invisible to me. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. Margaret pressed her lips together, fighting the tears that suddenly threatened to spill over. You're very kind, she managed, but you don't have to say things like that. I'm not being kind. I'm being honest. James leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Margaret, I see you. Someone who gets up before dawn to work a job that breaks her body. Someone who's surviving despite everything that's tried to break her spirit. That's not invisible. That's remarkable. A tear escaped, running down her weathered cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. I haven't talked to anyone like this I can't remember how long. My daughter, Rachel, she doesn't call anymore. Says I'm too depressing. Says I need to move on and be positive. As if losing everything is just a matter of attitude adjustment. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least able to understand our pain, James said softly. It's easier for them to distance themselves than to sit with the discomfort of watching someone they love struggle. That's very insightful for a driver. Margaret looked at him more carefully. You're not like the other staff I've met here. Something flickered in his eyes. I've had a lot of time to think about life, about what matters and what doesn't, and what does matter, in your opinion. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to the windows where dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Connection. Genuine human connection. Not the superficial pleasantries we exchange with strangers, but real understanding. Real seeing. The problem is, most of us are so busy performing the roles we think we're supposed to play that we forget how to just be. Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen and protected for 3 long years. You're not talking like someone who drives executives around for a living. Maybe I've been doing this job too long, he said with a slight smile. Or maybe I've learned that wisdom doesn't respect career titles. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the building slowly coming to life around them. Margaret could hear the distant ding of elevator bells, the first trickle of early arrivals beginning their workday. I should let you go, James said finally, standing. But Margaret, may I ask you something? Of course. When you lost your position here, when you lost your marriage and your home, did anyone tell you that your value hadn't changed? The question struck her like lightning. Margaret stood, her legs shaking slightly, and shook her head. No, no one said that. Then I'll say it now. He looked at her with such intensity that she couldn't look away. Your value hasn't changed, not one bit. Your circumstances changed. Your zip code changed. Your job title changed. But who you are, the core of you, that's exactly as valuable as it was when you had the office and the nameplate. More valuable, actually, because now you've survived what would have destroyed someone weaker. Margaret couldn't speak. The tears were flowing freely now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. 3 years. 3 years of holding it together, of swallowing her pain, of cleaning floors in a building where she used to matter. And this stranger, this kind-eyed driver, had seen her, really seen her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You have no idea what that means to me. I think I might." He picked up his briefcase, then paused. "Margaret, what floor do you clean next?" "The 20th, she said, still trying to compose herself. "Where I used to work, actually. A bit of painful poetry, I suppose. Would you do me a favor? When you get to the 20th floor, would you go to office 2015? Leave your card in the hallway and just go inside for a moment. Sit at the desk. Remember what it felt like to belong there." I don't think that's allowed. What if someone sees me? Then I'll take responsibility." He smiled, and there was something both sad and hopeful in it. Sometimes we need to remember who we were, to understand who we're becoming. "Promise me you'll try." Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." James turned toward the elevator, then looked back. "Oh, and Margaret, this conversation, this moment right here, it mattered to me too. More than you know." He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the elevator with a final nod. Margaret stood there, rooted to the spot, her cleaning cart forgotten beside her. Who was that man? What kind of driver spoke with such eloquence, such depth? And why did she feel like something fundamental had just shifted in her universe? Her hands were still trembling as she gathered her supplies and headed to the 20th floor. When she reached office 2015, she hesitated in the doorway. It was a corner office, much larger than her old workspace had been. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A massive desk made of rich mahogany. Everything screamed power and success. Margaret glanced up and down the empty hallway. Then, heart pounding, she stepped inside. She moved behind the desk and slowly lowered herself into the leather executive chair. It was like sitting on a cloud. Her hands rested on the polished surface of the desk, and for just a moment, she let herself remember. Remember what it felt like to have purpose, to have value, to matter. And in that moment, Margaret Walsh made herself a promise. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to find her way back. Not to cleaning floors, not to her old job, but to herself, to the woman who had value that couldn't be measured by a paycheck or a title. She stood, smoothing her uniform, and left the office with her head held higher than it had been in 3 years. She didn't know that the man she thought was a driver had watched the entire thing on the security feed in his office 1 floor up. She didn't know that James wasn't a driver at all. And she definitely didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. But she was about to find out. Margaret couldn't focus on her work for the rest of the morning. Her hands moved mechanically, wiping down surfaces and emptying trash bins. But her mind kept returning to that conversation, to the way James had looked at her, to the words he'd spoken that had cracked open something she thought was permanently sealed shut. "Your value hasn't changed." She was still thinking about it at noon when she clocked out and walked to the bus stop. The city was alive with lunch-hour chaos, people rushing past her like she was a stone in a stream. Margaret settled onto the bench, pulling her worn coat tighter against the autumn chill. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel, her first in 2 months. "Mom, I need you to stop listing me as your emergency contact at work. It's embarrassing when they call. You need to find someone else." Margaret stared at the message until the words blurred. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, a dozen responses fighting to be typed. "I have no one else. You're my daughter. Please don't abandon me too." Instead she wrote, "Okay, honey, I understand." She deleted honey and sent just, "Okay." The bus ride home took 40 minutes through neighborhoods that got progressively shabbier. Margaret watched the landscape change through the grimy window, her reflection ghosting over the passing scenery. When had she become this woman? This invisible, disposable woman? Her apartment building was a squat brick structure with a perpetually broken security door. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, her knees screaming with each step, and let herself into apartment 3C. It was clean. She'd made sure of that. But cleanliness couldn't hide the water stain on the ceiling, the carpet worn thin in traffic patterns, the second-hand furniture that didn't quite fit the space. This wasn't a home. It was just a place where she slept between shifts. Margaret made herself a sandwich she didn't want and sat at the small table by the window. She was reaching for the remote to turn on the television, desperate for any noise to fill the silence, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Probably a scam. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Hello? Margaret? It's James, from this morning. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. James? How did you get my number? There was a pause, and she could hear him take a breath. I asked Mrs. Patterson. I told her I needed to reach you about a scheduling matter. I hope that's not too forward. No, it's fine. I'm just surprised. Margaret set down her sandwich, her appetite completely gone now. Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. Another pause. This is going to sound strange, but I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about what you told me, and I found myself wondering if you'd eaten lunch yet. Margaret looked down at her sad sandwich. I'm about to. Would you consider having lunch with me instead? There's a diner about 6 blocks from where you live, Helen's place. Do you know it? How did he know where she lived? The employee records, she realized. Mrs. Patterson must have given him more than just her phone number. I know it, she said carefully. But James, why would you want to have lunch with me? Because I enjoyed talking with you this morning more than I've enjoyed a conversation in months. Because I think you might need a friend right now. And because, his voice softened, because I'd really like to see you again, if you're willing. Margaret's hand trembled slightly. This was probably a bad idea. She didn't know this man. He was at least 20 years younger than her, and there was something in his voice, something that didn't quite match the story of being a simple driver. But God, she was so tired of being alone. When? She heard herself ask. Would 30 minutes give you enough time? Yes. Then I'll see you there, Margaret. After he hung up, she sat frozen for a full minute. Then she practically ran to her bedroom. What did one wear to lunch with a mysterious driver who spoke like a philosopher? She settled on a simple blue cardigan over a white blouse, her nicest pair of jeans, and the pearl earrings her mother had given her decades ago. Her hands shook as she applied a touch of makeup, covering the worst of the age spots and the dark circles under her eyes. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see anyone particularly special. Just a 62-year-old woman who'd lived too hard and cried too much. But maybe that was enough. Helen's place was a classic American diner, all chrome and red vinyl booths. Margaret pushed through the door and immediately spotted James sitting in a corner booth. He'd changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a simple gray sweater. Somehow, he looked even more attractive this way. More approachable. More real. He stood when he saw her, that slight smile touching his lips. Margaret, thank you for coming. I'm still not entirely sure why I did, she admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. This is rather unusual. I hope unusually good rather than unusually uncomfortable. A waitress appeared, coffee pot in hand. Margaret accepted a cup gratefully, wrapping her chilled hands around the warmth. James ordered a burger. Margaret ordered soup, something cheap. Get whatever you want, James said gently. Please, it's my treat. The soup is fine. Margaret. He looked at her steadily. When was the last time you had a meal you actually wanted rather than what you could afford? The question hit like a punch. Margaret felt her eyes sting. That's not fair. You're right. I'm sorry. But his expression didn't change. I'll rephrase. What sounds good to you? Not what's practical. What sounds good? She looked down at the worn menu. The Reuben sandwich. I used to love a good Reuben. Then please have the Reuben, and fries, and whatever dessert catches your eye. The waitress returned, and James ordered for both of them, including 2 slices of apple pie for after. When they were alone again, Margaret studied him across the table. You're not really a driver, are you? His expression flickered. What makes you say that? Everything. The way you speak, the way you carry yourself, the fact that you're taking a cleaning lady to lunch and ordering her whatever she wants. She folded her hands on the table. I may have lost everything, James, but I'm not stupid. Who are you, really? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Then he sighed. You're right. I'm not a driver. I'm sorry I let you believe that. Then what are you? Does it matter? Yes, Margaret said firmly. Because right now, this feels like some kind of social experiment or charity case, and I don't know which is worse. It's neither. He leaned forward, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Margaret, I saw you this morning on the security monitors, sitting at that desk in office 2015. And do you know what I saw? A broken old woman playing pretend? I saw someone remembering who she was, someone refusing to let circumstances define her worth. And I thought, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought, here's someone who understands that life can strip away everything except who we really are. That still doesn't tell me who you are. I'm someone who has everything most people think they want. Money, success, respect, all the things that should make a person happy. His smile was sad. But I've learned that having everything external doesn't help when you feel empty inside. When you realize that every interaction is a transaction, every smile has an agenda, every conversation is calculated, understanding began to dawn. You're not a driver. You're an executive. Maybe even, let's just say I have a position that makes genuine connection almost impossible. He interrupted gently. This morning I came in early because I couldn't sleep. I was going to review contracts in my office, and then I saw you on the monitor working so hard, and something made me take off my name badge and go down to meet you, just as James, not as anyone with a title or position. Margaret sat back processing this. So this morning, when I thought you were a driver, I let you believe it because for the first time in years, someone was talking to me like I was a person. Not like I was a position to be impressed or a contact to be cultivated. You were just real. And now that I know you're not who you said you were, now I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to be real with you anyway. To have lunch with you not as anyone important, but just as James, a man who enjoyed talking with you and wants to do it again. The food arrived, breaking the tension. Margaret looked down at her Reuben, the golden bread perfectly toasted, cheese melting out the sides. When was the last time someone had bought her a meal she actually wanted? She picked up half of the sandwich and took a bite. It was delicious. And to her surprise, she realized she was actually hungry. Tell me about your daughter, James said softly. Rachel. What happened there? Margaret chewed slowly, buying time. Then she set down the sandwich and met his eyes. She was ashamed of me. Is ashamed of me. I went from being her successful mother to being the woman who cleans toilets. She stopped introducing me to her friends. Stopped inviting me to family events. Eventually, she just stopped. That must hurt beyond words. It does. But I understand it too, in a way. She's 34, building her own life. She doesn't want the burden of a struggling mother. And I don't blame her for that. Not really. Margaret's voice cracked slightly. I just miss her. I miss having someone who cares if I come home at night. Someone who'd notice if I just disappeared. James reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. I would notice, he said quietly. I know we just met. I know this is all very strange. But Margaret, I would notice. They sat like that for a moment, his warm hand covering her work-worn one, the diner bustling around them unnoticed. Then James withdrew his hand, and they both took shaky breaths. So, Margaret said, trying to lighten the mood, are you going to tell me what position you actually hold? Or am I supposed to guess? Would it change how you see me? I don't know. Probably. Then let's leave it mysterious for now, he said with a slight smile. Let me just be James, and you be Margaret, and we can be two people having lunch and talking about real things. No titles, no positions, just connection. Margaret considered this. Every logical part of her brain said this was a bad idea, that she should demand answers, that she should protect herself from whatever this was. But the part of her that had been so achingly lonely for so long won out. Okay, she agreed. Just James and Margaret. But James, you should know something. What's that? I'm going to figure out who you are eventually. And when I do, if I find out you've been toying with me or treating me like some kind of project, then you'll never speak to me again, and I'll deserve it. His expression was serious. Margaret, I swear to you, my interest in knowing you has nothing to do with charity or experiments. I needed to talk to someone real. And you're the first person in longer than I can remember who's treated me like a human being. They finished their lunch talking about safer topics, books they'd read, places they'd traveled, or in Margaret's case, places she'd always wanted to go but never could afford. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, punctuated by genuine laughter that felt strange and wonderful in Margaret's throat. When the check came, James paid without even looking at it. He walked her to the bus stop afterward, his hands in his pockets, his demeanor relaxed in a way that made him seem younger. "Can I see you again?" he asked as the bus approached in the distance. "I work tomorrow morning. Same time." "I know. What I meant was, can I take you to dinner? Tomorrow evening?" Margaret's heart stuttered. "James, I don't think—" "Please." Something vulnerable crossed his face. "I'm not asking for anything more than your company. Just dinner and conversation. That's all." The bus pulled up with a screech of brakes. Margaret had to decide. Step onto that bus and return to her safe, lonely life, or take a risk on this strange, kind man who looked at her like she mattered. "Okay," she whispered. "Tomorrow evening." His smile was like sunrise. "I'll pick you up at 7. Margaret climbed onto the bus and found a seat. As it pulled away, she looked back to see James still standing there, watching her leave with an expression she couldn't quite name. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number that she now knew was James. "Thank you for lunch. Thank you for being real. Sleep well, Margaret." She saved his number under James and held the phone against her chest, feeling something in her heart that she thought had died 3 years ago. Hope. It terrified her. Margaret changed her outfit 4 times before settling on a simple navy dress she'd owned for years. It was outdated, probably, but it was the nicest thing she had. She stood in front of the mirror, applying lipstick with trembling hands, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt this nervous about seeing someone. Her reflection showed every one of her 62 years, the lines around her eyes, the gray in her hair that she couldn't afford to color anymore, the way her neck had started to soften with age. What was she thinking? Going to dinner with a man who was clearly successful, clearly younger, clearly out of her league. The knock on her door at exactly 7 made her jump. Margaret took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one final time, and opened the door. James stood there in dark slacks and a charcoal button-down shirt, holding a small bouquet of daisies. Not roses, not some elaborate arrangement, just simple white daisies tied with twine. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. "You don't have to say that." "I know I don't have to. I'm saying it because it's true." He extended the flowers. "These reminded me of you. Simple, honest, lovely." Margaret took the daisies, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you. I'll just put these in water." She found a glass in her kitchen, filled it, and placed the daisies on the counter. When she returned, James was looking around her small apartment with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." The restaurant James chose wasn't flashy or pretentious. It was a small Italian place with checked tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. The kind of place where the owner greeted customers by name and the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. "Mr. Thornton!" The owner, a round man with a magnificent mustache, approached with open arms. "So good to see you, and you've brought a guest." Margaret felt James tense slightly beside her. Mr. Thornton. So that was his last name. "Hello, Antonio. Could we have the corner table?" Of course. Antonio led them to a secluded booth in the back, away from the other diners. He winked at James. "Very private, yes? I understand." When Antonio left them with menus, Margaret fixed James with a steady look. "Thornton?" "Yes." "James Thornton?" He met her eyes without flinching. "Yes." Margaret's mind raced through what she knew about the building where she worked, the executives, the owners, and then it clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. You're not just an executive. You own the building, the company, everything. James's silence was confirmation enough. "Oh my God." Margaret set down her menu with shaking hands. "You're James Thornton, J.T. Thornton, the man whose picture is in the lobby, the one everyone speaks about in whispers." Margaret, no. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "No, this is some kind of joke, isn't it? Some kind of bet or I don't know what, but I can't." "Please sit down." His voice was quiet but firm. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been playing dress-up with the cleaning lady? That you thought it would be entertaining to find one person who would talk to me like I was human?" The rawness in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. "Yes, that's exactly what I thought. And I was right." Margaret slowly sank back into her seat. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I own the company," James continued. his hands flat on the table. "I inherited it when my father died 5 years ago. I was 32 years old, and suddenly I had 3,000 employees depending on me, buildings in 7 cities, more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and absolutely no one who saw me as anything other than James Thornton, CEO. That's not my problem." "You're right. It's not."
He leaned forward. "But Margaret, do you remember what you said yesterday? About being invisible? That's what I've become too. Just in a different way. People see the title, the money, the power. They don't see me. So you decided to pretend to be someone else? To trick me?"
"I didn't plan it. I saw you on the security feed and something made me go down there. I didn't intend to mislead you. But when you assumed I was a driver, when you started talking to me like I was just James, it felt so good to be seen that way that I couldn't bring myself to correct you." Margaret pressed her fingers to her temples. "This is insane." "I know. You could have anyone, any woman you wanted, younger, prettier, someone from your world. I don't want someone from my world." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "My world is full of people who want something from me, who see me as a means to an end. You're the first person in 5 years who's talked to me without an agenda, who's been real with me. Because I didn't know who you were." "Exactly." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Margaret, would you have talked to me the way you did if you'd known? Would you have told me about losing your job, your marriage, your daughter? Or would you have been careful and polite and kept your distance?" She wanted to argue, wanted to say it wouldn't have mattered, but she couldn't lie. "I would have been different. That's why I didn't tell you. Not to deceive you, but to give us both a chance to be real with each other." Antonio appeared with wine, breaking the tension. He poured 2 glasses and disappeared again with remarkable discretion. Margaret took a long sip, needing the warmth to steady her nerves. "I should leave," she said finally. "This isn't... We're not what? 2 people who enjoy talking to each other? 2 people who feel less alone when we're together?" James's eyes held hers. "Margaret, I'm not asking you to be impressed by who I am. I'm asking you to see past it, to keep being the person who talked to me in that hallway like I was worth knowing beyond a title. But you lied to me. I omitted information, and I'm deeply sorry for that. But everything else, everything I said to you, every feeling I expressed, that was all completely honest." Margaret twisted her napkin in her lap. "Why me? Really? I need to understand why you're doing this." James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "My mother died when I was 16. Cancer. Before she passed, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'James, don't let money and power make you forget that the most important thing in life is connecting with people who make you feel like yourself.' She was a cafeteria worker before she married my father. She never forgot where she came from." He paused, swallowing hard. "When my father died and I inherited everything, I threw myself into work. I dated women who looked perfect on my arm. I attended charity galas and business dinners, and I slowly realized I was dying inside, that I'd become exactly what my mother feared. A man so surrounded by wealth and status that he'd forgotten how to just be. And then you saw me scrubbing floors, and then I saw you sitting at that desk, remembering who you were, and something in me broke open." He finally reached across and took her hand. "Margaret, I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because you remind me that there's more to life than quarterly reports and board meetings. You remind me how to be human." Margaret looked down at their joined hands. His was smooth, well manicured. Hers was rough, scarred from years of hard work. They shouldn't fit together, but somehow they did. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be around someone like you." "Then be around James. Just James. The man who gets insomnia and walks through empty buildings at dawn. The man who's terrified he's going to die alone because no one really knows him. The man who met an extraordinary woman and wants desperately for her to give him a chance. I'm not extraordinary. You survived losing everything and still found the strength to keep going. You clean floors in a building where you once had respect, and you do it with dignity. You're raising yourself up from nothing with no one's help." His grip on her hand tightened. "Margaret, that's more extraordinary than anything I've ever done with all my advantages." She felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "This is crazy. I know. People will talk." They'll say horrible things about me. Let them. Your board, your employees. They'll think I'm after your money. I don't care what they think. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her scarred knuckles. I care what you think. I care that you're here, and I'm hoping against hope that you'll stay. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his lips on her skin. Every rational part of her screamed that this was impossible, that she should walk away before she got hurt, before she became the punchline to someone's joke. But she was so tired of being rational, so tired of being careful, so tired of being alone. One condition, she said, opening her eyes. Anything. I keep my job. I keep working. I don't become some kept woman who depends on you for everything. I need to rebuild my life on my own terms. Agreed, though I'm moving you out of janitorial. James? Not because of this. Because you're overqualified for that position. I looked at your file. You have 15 years of administrative experience. I'm putting you back where you belong. People will say it's because of this, whatever this is. Then they'll be wrong. I'm doing it because it's right. Because watching you clean floors when you should be managing projects is a waste of talent. He smiled slightly. And because my mother would haunt me if I didn't. Despite everything, Margaret laughed. It was a watery sound, but genuine. You're impossible. I'm determined. There's a difference. Antonio returned and they ordered food. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the air between them remained charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. As they ate, Margaret watched James relax, saw him smile more freely, heard him laugh without restraint, and she realized that he'd told her the truth. Beneath the CEO exterior was just a man who wanted to be known, a man who, impossibly, seemed to want to know her. When he drove her home later, walking her to her door like a gentleman, he paused before leaving. Margaret? Yes? Thank you for staying, for giving me a chance. I must be crazy. Then we're crazy together. He kissed her forehead gently. Sleep well. She watched him walk away, her heart simultaneously soaring and terrified. What had she just agreed to? Inside her apartment, the daisies sat on the counter, simple and honest and lovely. Margaret touched one soft petal and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that this impossible thing might actually be possible. Her phone buzzed. James. I'm already looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Good night, Margaret. She saved the message and whispered to her empty apartment. Good night, James. And for the first time in 3 years, Margaret Walsh went to bed with a smile on her face. The whispers started on Monday morning. Margaret arrived at 7, as she always did, but this time she wasn't carrying a mop and bucket. She wore a simple gray pantsuit she'd found at a thrift store and carried a leather portfolio that James had left at her door the night before with a note, "For your first day back, Jay." The receptionist's eyes widened when Margaret approached. Mrs. Walsh? I was told you'd be starting in the administrative department today. That's right. Margaret kept her voice steady, despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. 20th floor, office 2018. The receptionist's smile was strained. Congratulations on your promotion. The word promotion hung in the air like an accusation. Margaret took the elevator up, feeling the stares of the other passengers. By the time she reached the 20th floor, her hands were trembling. She found office 2018, a modest space with a desk, computer, and a small window. Nothing fancy, but it had a nameplate on the door. Margaret Walsh, project coordinator. She traced the letters with one finger, remembering how it felt to have her name mean something again. Well, well, a woman's voice, sharp with disdain, cut through her moment. If it isn't our newest project coordinator. Margaret turned to find a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed, her arms crossed over her chest. 2 other women stood behind her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. I'm Margaret Walsh. She extended her hand. The woman didn't take it. I know who you are. I'm Patricia Hendricks, Senior Project Manager. We all know exactly who you are and how you got this position. The words landed like a slap. Margaret dropped her hand. I was rehired based on my 15 years of administrative experience. Is that what they're calling it now? Patricia's smile was cruel. Listen, I don't care what you do with your personal life, but when you sleep your way into a position that 3 qualified candidates interviewed for, that affects all of us. I didn't, Save it. Patricia leaned in close. You were cleaning toilets last week. Now you have an office. We're not stupid. But let me give you some advice. Enjoy it while it lasts. Men like James Thornton get bored easily. And when he's done with you, you'll be right back where you started. Or worse. Patricia walked away, her heels clicking authoritatively on the tile floor. The other women followed, whispering to each other and glancing back at Margaret with expressions that ranged from pity to disgust. Margaret stood frozen in her doorway, Patricia's words echoing in her head. She wanted to run, to disappear, to prove them right by quitting before she was humiliated further. Instead, she walked into her office, closed the door, and sat at her desk. Then she allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to cry. When the 3 minutes were up, she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and opened her email. James had sent her project files to review, along with a note. Take your time getting oriented. If you need anything, I'm here. Jay. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not without breaking down again. Instead, she threw herself into the work, determined to prove that she deserved this position. By noon, Margaret had reviewed 3 project proposals and identified critical errors in 2 of them. By 3, she'd reorganized a filing system that had been a mess for months. By 5, she'd created a new tracking spreadsheet that streamlined the entire department's workflow. Patricia walked past her office twice, looking in with an expression that shifted from contempt to grudging surprise. At 6, when most people had left, there was a soft knock on Margaret's door. James stood there, still in his suit from meetings, his tie loosened slightly. May I come in? Margaret gestured to the chair across from her desk. Of course. He sat, studying her face carefully. How was your first day? Productive. She kept her voice neutral. Margaret. Fine. It was fine. You're lying. He leaned forward. What happened? She wanted to pretend everything was okay, but she was so tired of pretending. Your senior project manager called me a whore. Well, not in those exact words, but the meaning was clear. James's expression darkened immediately. Who? It doesn't matter. It does matter. That's harassment, and I won't tolerate it. James, if you go after everyone who says something about me, you'll spend all your time fighting battles that will only make things worse. Margaret closed her laptop. I knew this would happen. I told you people would talk. I don't care if they talk. But I do! The words burst out before she could stop them. I care because I have to work with these people. I have to see them every day. And every time they look at me, they're going to see someone who slept her way into a position she doesn't deserve. Do you deserve this position? The question caught her off guard. What? Do you deserve this position? Based on your skills and experience, do you deserve to be here? Margaret thought about the work she'd done today, the errors she'd caught, the systems she'd improved. Yes, I do. Then prove it. James's voice was firm but gentle. Prove it to yourself and to them through your work. Not by running away, not by quitting, but by being so good at what you do that no one can question whether you belong here. That could take months, years. Then take them. I'm not going anywhere. He stood and moved around the desk, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes were level. Margaret, I know this is hard. I know it's uncomfortable, but you are strong enough to handle this. You've survived worse. Have I? Her voice broke. At least when I was cleaning floors, I was invisible. Now everyone's watching, waiting for me to fail. Then don't fail. Show them what I already know, that you're brilliant and capable and deserve every opportunity you've earned. Margaret looked into his eyes and saw such absolute faith in her that it made her chest ache. Why do you believe in me so much? Because you believe in yourself. You just forget sometimes. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. Let me remind you until you remember permanently. The tenderness of the gesture, the intimacy of the moment, overwhelmed her. Margaret leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft, hesitant, but James responded immediately, his hand coming up to cup her face. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. We shouldn't do this here, Margaret whispered. Anyone could see. I don't care. I do. James, I need to earn respect here on my own. If people see us together, every accomplishment will be attributed to our relationship rather than my abilities. He pulled back slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to be careful, discreet, at least until I've proven myself. She took his hand. I'm not ending this. I'm just asking us to be smart about it. James was quiet for a long moment. How long? I don't know. A few months, maybe, until people stop watching my every move. A few months of pretending I don't care about you, of watching you struggle and not being able to publicly support you. Yes, Margaret squeezed his hand, because if you fight my battles for me, I'll never be anything more than James Thornton's girlfriend. I need to be Margaret Walsh, project coordinator who earned her position. Do you understand? He stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. Thank you. But Margaret, I need you to understand something too. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm falling in love with you. Deeply. Completely. And that's not going to change whether we're public or private. Whether it takes months or years for people to accept us. I'm in this. The words hit her like a tidal wave. James, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. He moved toward the door, then paused. Dinner tonight? At your place? I'll bring takeout. That sounds perfect. After he left, Margaret sat in her office as darkness fell outside her window. She touched her lips where he'd kissed her and tried to process what he'd said. He was falling in love with her. And God help her, she was falling in love with him too. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw you two in your office. Guess we know how you really got promoted. Watch your back, Walsh. Margaret stared at the message, her stomach churning. Someone had seen them. Someone was watching. She deleted the message and gathered her things. As she left the building, she felt eyes on her from every direction. The security guard, the cleaning crew, the late-working executives. Everyone was watching. Everyone was judging. And Margaret realized that the hardest part wasn't going to be proving her professional worth. It was going to be maintaining her relationship with James while the whole world tried to tear them apart. When she got home, James was already there, sitting on the steps outside her building with bags of Chinese food. You're early, she said. I couldn't wait. He stood, and the vulnerability in his expression broke her heart. Margaret, about what I said earlier. Come inside. She unlocked her door. We need to talk. They sat at her small kitchen table, food forgotten between them. Margaret pulled out her phone and showed him the threatening text. His jaw tightened. Who sent this? I don't know. But James, this is what I'm talking about. If we're not careful, this situation is going to explode in ways that hurt both of us. Then what do you want to do? Margaret took a deep breath. I want to prove myself first. Completely. Undeniably. And then, when no one can question my abilities, when I've earned respect through my work, I want to stand beside you proudly, as your equal. You already are my equal, not in the eyes of everyone else. And that matters because I have to work with those people. She reached across and took both his hands. I need you to trust me on this. Give me time to build my reputation back. Let me show everyone who Margaret Walsh really is. And then, she smiled, feeling tears threaten again. Then I want to tell the world that I'm falling in love with you too. The expression on his face made everything worth it. Every whisper, every judgment, every cruel comment. Because James Thornton looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. I can wait, he said. For you, I can wait. They ate dinner in her tiny apartment, talking and laughing, stealing kisses when the moment felt right. And for a few hours, the outside world ceased to exist. But Margaret knew the real battle was just beginning. 4 months later, Margaret stood in front of the board of directors, presenting her proposal for restructuring the company's project management system. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She'd spent weeks preparing this, running numbers, creating projections, and she knew it was solid. As you can see in the final slide, she concluded, implementing this system would save the company approximately $2 million annually while improving efficiency by 30%. The room was silent. Margaret held her breath. Then, Thomas Bradford, the most senior board member, began to clap. Others joined him until the entire room was applauding. Exceptional work, Mrs. Walsh, Thomas said, standing. I move that we implement this proposal immediately. Seconded, another board member called out. James, sitting at the head of the table, allowed himself a small smile. All in favor? A chorus of ayes filled the room. Motion carries. Well done, Margaret. His eyes met hers briefly. and in that moment she saw everything he couldn't say in front of the board: pride, love, admiration. After the meeting, Patricia Hendricks approached Margaret in the hallway. The woman who'd been so cruel on Margaret's first day now wore an expression of grudging respect. "That was impressive," Patricia said stiffly. "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you that were unfair." Margaret studied her for a moment. She could be petty, could make Patricia grovel. But what would that accomplish? "Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate you saying that." Patricia nodded and walked away. Margaret leaned against the wall, letting the victory wash over her. She'd done it. She'd proven herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Dinner tonight. We need to talk." Something in those 4 words made her stomach clench. They met at his penthouse apartment, a space Margaret had only visited a handful of times. James was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows when she arrived, his posture tense. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. He turned, and the expression on his face made her heart sink. "We need to discuss where this is going." "James, it's been 4 months, Margaret. 4 months of sneaking around, of pretending we're not together, of me watching you succeed and not being able to celebrate with you publicly, of falling more in love with you every day while acting like you're just another employee." His voice cracked slightly. "I can't do it anymore." Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. "You're ending this?" "No." He crossed to her quickly, taking her hands. "God, no. I'm saying I want more. I want to tell people about us. I want to take you to dinner without hiding in dark corners. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours. But James, if we go public now, everything I've built will be questioned. People will always say something, Margaret. There will always be someone who thinks they know the truth about us." He cupped her face in his hands. "But I know the truth. You know the truth, and that should be enough." "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of losing my job. Of losing the respect I've finally earned." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Of discovering that without all the secrecy and obstacles, we're just ordinary." James pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "Margaret Walsh, there is nothing ordinary about you, and if you're worried about us not having enough to sustain us, then you haven't been paying attention to the last 4 months. He was right. They'd spent nearly every evening together, talking, laughing, learning each other's stories. He knew how she took her coffee. She knew he was afraid of heights. He knew she cried during old movies. She knew he called his mother's grave every year on her birthday. "What if people treat me differently?" she asked against his chest. "Then that's their problem, not yours." He pulled back to look at her. "Margaret, you've spent 4 months proving your worth. You just saved the company $2 million. Your work speaks for itself. Anyone who questions your abilities after that isn't worth worrying about. When did you want to tell people?" "There's a company gala next week. I want you there, as my date, officially." Margaret's breath caught. The gala was the biggest event of the year. Everyone would be there. Board members, executives, employees. "That's very public. That's the point." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I'm tired of hiding how much I love you, and I want the world to see the extraordinary woman I'm lucky enough to be with." Before Margaret could respond, her phone rang. Rachel, her daughter who hadn't called in months. "I need to take this," she said, her hands shaking as she answered. "Rachel, Mom." Her daughter's voice was thick with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I saw the article about you in the business section, about your presentation to the board, and I realized, God, Mom, I've been such a terrible daughter." Margaret sank onto James's couch, her own tears flowing. "Rachel, no, let me say this. I was ashamed of you for losing your job, for cleaning floors, for struggling, but you were never the one who should have been ashamed. It was me. You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and instead of supporting you, I abandoned you. Honey, it's okay. It's not okay. Mom, I read what they said about you in that article, how you came back from nothing, how you rebuilt yourself, and I thought about how you did all of that alone because I was too selfish to be there for you." Rachel's voice broke. "Can you forgive me?" Margaret looked at James, who was watching her with such tenderness. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd rebuilt, and she realized that holding on to anger would only weigh her down. "There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart." "You're my daughter. I love you. Always. Can I see you? Soon? Yes, I'd like that very much. They talked for a few more minutes, making plans for lunch the following week. When Margaret hung up, she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. James held her while she sobbed, not saying anything, just being there. She came back. Margaret finally whispered. After all this time, she came back. Because you showed her it was possible to come back from anything. James kissed her forehead. You taught her that by example. Margaret wiped her eyes and looked at the man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to love her anyway. The gala. I'll go with you. His smile was radiant. Yeah? Yeah. But James, I need you to understand something. I'm 62 years old. I have gray hair and wrinkles and a body that's seen better days. Standing next to you at that gala, people are going to have opinions. Let them. I'm serious. You're going to hear comments, see judgmental looks, and I'll ignore every single one of them because I'll be too busy being proud of the woman on my arm. He took her hand. Margaret, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care what you think. I care what we have together. That's all that matters. The night of the gala, Margaret stood in front of her mirror, wearing a simple black dress that James had insisted on buying her. It was elegant without being flashy, and it made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she walked into the ballroom on James's arm, conversations stopped. Heads turned. Cameras flashed. Margaret held her head high. Patricia was there with her husband. She caught Margaret's eye and raised her champagne glass in a small salute. Thomas Bradford approached them, smiling warmly. Mrs. Walsh, you look lovely. And James, you're a lucky man. I know, James said, his arm tightening around Margaret's waist. As the evening progressed, Margaret realized something profound. Yes, people stared. Yes, some whispered. But others approached with genuine warmth, congratulating her on her presentation, thanking her for her work. And slowly, she stopped caring about the ones who judged and started focusing on the ones who mattered. Want to dance? James asked, as the band started a slow song. On the dance floor, held in James's arms, Margaret finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her all along. Her value had never been tied to her job title, her bank account, or what other people thought of her. Her value came from who she was, how she'd survived, how she'd fought her way back from nothing with grace and dignity. I love you, she whispered against his shoulder. I love you too, he whispered back. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. Thank you for reminding me I was worth taking the journey in the first place. Later that night, standing on James's balcony looking out at the city lights, Margaret thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago. Broken, invisible, convinced her best days were behind her, and she thought about the woman she'd become. Whole, seen, living proof that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to find love. Never too late to remember your worth. What are you thinking about? James asked, joining her with 2 glasses of wine. I'm thinking about how I mistook a millionaire for a driver, and how that mistake changed everything. Best mistake either of us ever made. He clinked his glass against hers. James, can I tell you something? Always. That morning when you found me cleaning floors, I hadn't cried in 3 years. I thought I was too broken to feel anything anymore. But you looked at me like I mattered, and something inside me woke up. You were never broken, Margaret. Just bent, and bent things can straighten themselves out again. She leaned against him, feeling his warmth, his strength, his unwavering faith in her. What do we do now? Now. He kissed the top of her head. Now we live, we love. We show the world that second chances are real, and that the best parts of life can come when you least expect them. Margaret smiled, finally understanding the truth she'd spent 4 months learning. Life doesn't end when you lose everything. Sometimes that's when it finally begins. And love doesn't have an expiration date. It can bloom at any age, in any circumstance, as long as you're brave enough to let it in. She'd been brave, and that bravery had given her everything she thought she'd lost. Purpose, dignity, connection, and a love that saw past all her scars to the beautiful soul beneath. To new beginnings, Margaret said, raising her glass. To you, James corrected, his eyes shining with love. For teaching me what truly matters. They stood together under the stars, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unexpected way, Proof that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as mistakes, and that the only thing more powerful than surviving is learning to truly live again.